In the vast, sun-scorched landscapes of the American Southwest, one river has become both a lifeline and a battleground: the Colorado River. Stretching over 1,400 miles from the snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains to the arid deserts of Mexico, this mighty river sustains nearly 40 million people across 7 U.S. states and 2 countries. It feeds some of America's largest cities, including Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, irrigates millions of acres of farmland, and powers dams that generate electricity for millions of homes. But today, the Colorado River is running dry, and the fight over its dwindling waters has become one of the most pressing environmental and political conflicts in the United States. Decades of overuse, population growth, and climate change have pushed the river to its breaking point. Once mighty reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell have sunk to historic lows, exposing sun-bleached canyon walls that were underwater for generations. Meanwhile, cities, farmers, and indigenous nations are locked in an escalating struggle to secure their share of the shrinking supply. The question is no longer how to divide the river's water, but how to save it from collapse altogether. This is the story of how a century-old water deal forged in optimism and politics has collided with a 21st century reality of drought and scarcity. It's a story of innovation and conflict, of communities forced to rethink their relationship with nature, and of a river that has shaped the destiny of the American West. As the Colorado River continues to shrink, the choices made today will determine the future of millions and reveal whether America can adapt before its greatest water source runs dry. The Colorado River is more than a river. It is the very artery that gives life to the American West. Winding through 7 U.S. states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California, before crossing into Mexico, it nourishes some of the driest and fastest growing regions on Earth. From the green fields of California's Imperial Valley to the shimmering skyline of Las Vegas, every drop of this river supports a complex network of cities, farms, industries, and ecosystems that simply could not exist without it. For nearly a century, the Colorado has been the engine of Western expansion. Its waters transformed deserts into farmland and allowed modern metropolises to rise where there was once only dust. Through a massive system of dams, canals, and pipelines, the river fuels hydroelectric plants that power millions of homes and supplies water to more than 40 million people. It irrigates over 5 million acres of farmland, producing a significant share of the nation's vegetables, fruits, and livestock feed. But the lifeline that built the West is now under unprecedented stress. Population growth continues to surge in cities like Phoenix and Los Angeles, while climate change tightens its grip, reducing the snowpack that feeds the river each spring. The demands placed on the Colorado have long exceeded its natural supply, and the gap between what we take and what nature provides is widening each year. The Colorado River symbolizes both the success and fragility of human ambition. It is a testament to what engineering and cooperation can achieve, and a warning of what happens when we push nature beyond its limits. As the river weakens, so too does the balance that sustains life across the American West. The 1922 Colorado River Compact stands as one of the most important and most controversial water agreements in American history. Signed over a century ago, it was an ambitious attempt to divide the waters of the Colorado River among 7 U.S. states: Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California. At the time, the American West was rapidly developing, and policymakers believed the river's vast flow could support endless growth. The compact aimed to prevent conflict by ensuring each state received a fair share of the river's bounty. Negotiated in an era of limited scientific data, the compact divided the river into two regions, the upper basin and the lower basin, and allocated 7.5 million acre-feet of water per year to each. However, this decision was based on unusually wet years of river flow data, creating a false sense of abundance. In reality, the Colorado River's average flow was significantly lower than the figures used in 1922. Over time, as drought and climate change reduced the river's supply, the compact's rigid allocations became increasingly unsustainable. The agreement also failed to include Native American tribes in Mexico, two groups that relied heavily on the river long before any states were established. These omissions have fueled decades of legal disputes and calls for reform. Despite its flaws, the 1922 Compact remains the foundation of water law in the West, governing how the river's water is distributed even today. What began as a promise of prosperity has turned into a source of tension as states, farmers, and cities now compete for a resource that can no longer meet everyone's needs. The century-old compact is both a relic of optimism and a stark reminder that even well-intentioned agreements must evolve with the realities of a changing world. Climate change and the mega-drought. The Colorado River crisis cannot be understood without confronting the immense influence of climate change. Over the past 2 decades, the American Southwest has experienced what scientists call a mega-drought, the worst in at least 1,200 years. This prolonged dry period, intensified by rising global temperatures, has dramatically reduced the river's flow, threatening the water supply for tens of millions of people. Once reliable snowpacks in the Rocky Mountains, which feed the Colorado each spring, are melting earlier and producing less runoff. Meanwhile, hotter air is drawing more moisture from the soil and increasing evaporation from reservoirs, compounding the problem year after year. On average, the Colorado River now carries about 20% less water than it did at the start of the 20th century, and scientists warn that number could drop by as much as 40% by mid-century if global temperatures continue to rise. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the river's 2 major reservoirs, have fallen to their lowest levels since they were filled, exposing once submerged canyon walls and leaving vast bathtub rings as haunting reminders of how much has been lost. This mega-drought is not a temporary event. It's a new climate reality. The West is getting hotter and drier, and extreme weather patterns are becoming the norm. Communities that once relied on predictable snowmelt and seasonal rains are now forced to make do with uncertainty. Farmers are leaving fields fallow, cities are imposing water restrictions, and ecosystems that depend on the river are collapsing. The Colorado River's decline is a warning signal, a clear illustration of how climate change transforms not just the environment but every aspect of human life. Unless bold action is taken to adapt and reduce emissions, the river's future and the future of the West will remain in jeopardy. Cities versus agriculture. One of the fiercest battles in the Colorado River crisis lies between 2 powerful forces: the booming cities of the Southwest and the vast agricultural empire that feeds the nation. Together, they rely on the same dwindling water source, yet their needs, priorities, and political influence often clash. Cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Denver continue to expand, demanding ever more water to sustain millions of residents, lush golf courses, and industrial development. Meanwhile, agriculture consumes roughly 80% of the river's allocated water, much of it used to grow crops like alfalfa, cotton, and lettuce in desert regions that receive almost no rainfall. This uneasy relationship has deep roots. Agriculture was the foundation upon which the modern West was built. Massive irrigation systems transformed barren land into productive farmland, turning states like California and Arizona into agricultural powerhouses. But as urban populations exploded, city leaders began questioning why so much of the river's limited water still goes to farming, especially for crops exported overseas or used for livestock feed. Farmers, in turn, argue that they produce essential food and sustain rural economies, while cities waste water on decorative lawns and swimming pools. The conflict has grown sharper as the Colorado River shrinks. When federal officials call for water cuts, the question of who sacrifices first sparks outrage. Some urban areas are investing in conservation technologies, wastewater recycling, and desalination to reduce dependence on the river. Meanwhile, farmers are experimenting with more efficient irrigation and switching to less water-intensive crops. Still, the divide remains. The fight between cities and agriculture is not just about water, it's about identity, survival, and the future of the American West. Both sides must adapt, or both may lose the lifeblood that sustains them. Few images capture the severity of the Colorado River crisis more starkly than the receding waters of its great reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Once symbols of American engineering triumph, these massive man-made lakes are now ground zero in a growing environmental emergency. Created by the Hoover and Glen Canyon dams, they were designed to store water for millions of people and generate hydroelectric power for cities across the Southwest. But today, both reservoirs are at their lowest levels since they were first filled, revealing eerie white bathtub rings along their canyon walls, scars left by decades of overuse and a drying climate. At full capacity, Lake Mead could hold enough water to submerge the entire state of Connecticut under a foot of water. Now it hovers near 1/3 of that volume. Lake Powell, upstream, has fared no better, exposing once hidden canyons and stranding boat ramps high above the waterline. As water levels drop, the risks go beyond aesthetics. Hydropower generation at both dams is in jeopardy. If the reservoirs fall below certain thresholds, known as dead pool, water can no longer flow through the dam's turbines, cutting off electricity to millions. The vanishing reservoirs are a direct reflection of a system pushed beyond its limits. Years of drought, coupled with relentless demand from cities and farms, have drained these crucial lifelines faster than nature can replenish them. Emergency water cuts have been ordered, but they remain temporary fixes to a long-term crisis. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are more than storage tanks. They are warning signs of a region on the brink. Their decline exposes the fragile balance between human ambition and environmental reality, a balance that must be restored if the West is to have a sustainable future. Long before the United States drew borders and signed compacts, the Colorado River sustained indigenous peoples who lived along its banks for thousands of years. The Hopi, Navajo, Ute, Cocopah, and many other tribes depended on its waters for survival, agriculture, and spiritual connection. Yet when the 1922 Colorado River Compact was drafted, not a single Native American voice was invited to the table. Despite their deep historical and cultural ties to the river, indigenous nations were largely excluded from the allocation of its waters, a legacy of injustice that continues to shape the West today. Today, 30 federally recognized tribes hold rights to roughly 20% of the Colorado River's water on paper. But in practice, many of these rights remain unfulfilled. Some tribes lack the infrastructure, funding, or political power to access the water legally allocated to them. Others are still locked in lengthy legal battles to have their claims recognized. The Navajo Nation, for instance, has fought for decades to secure water access for communities that still rely on truck deliveries or contaminated wells. As the river crisis deepens, Indigenous voices are demanding not just inclusion, but leadership in shaping its future. Many tribes advocate for a more holistic view of water, one that honors its sacredness and recognizes its role in sustaining all life, not just human development. Their approach contrasts sharply with the profit-driven mindset that has long dominated water policy in the West. Water justice for Indigenous nations is more than a moral obligation. It's essential for the river's survival. Recognizing tribal sovereignty, investing in equitable water access, and respecting traditional ecological knowledge could pave the way toward a more sustainable and just Colorado River system, one that finally includes all who depend on it. At the heart of the Colorado River crisis lies a complex and often contentious web of politics. The fight over who gets how much water and who must cut back has become one of the most divisive environmental battles in the United States. Since the signing of the 1922 Colorado River Compact, 7 U.S. states have shared the river's water under a system built on negotiation, compromise, and, increasingly, confrontation. But as the river dwindles, the political tensions between the upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, and the lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada, are intensifying. Each state has its own priorities and powerful stakeholders. California, with its vast agricultural empire, has some of the oldest and most protected water rights. Arizona and Nevada, by contrast, have seen explosive urban growth and argue for a more equitable distribution. The federal government, through the Bureau of Reclamation, acts as both referee and enforcer, a role that becomes more challenging as water shortages deepen. In recent years, Washington has had to impose emergency cuts, sparking fierce debates and legal threats from states unwilling to compromise. Beyond the states, powerful water districts, farmers' associations, indigenous tribes, and environmental groups all compete for influence. Every proposed solution, from reallocating water rights to building new infrastructure, faces political pushback. Even within states, internal rivalries between rural and urban interests complicate decision-making. The politics of the Colorado River reveal the fundamental tension between human ambition and natural limits. For decades, water was promised as if it were infinite. Now, as scarcity becomes undeniable, political leaders must confront the painful reality that not everyone can have as much as they once did. The future of the river, and the millions who depend on it, hinges on whether cooperation can overcome competition. As the Colorado River dwindles, survival in the American Southwest depends on one thing: innovation. Faced with shrinking reservoirs, deepening drought, and rising demand, cities, farmers, and scientists are rethinking how water is used, recycled, and conserved. Across the region, a quiet revolution is underway, one that could, really redefine the future of life in the desert. In cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix, once symbols of water excess, aggressive conservation efforts are yielding impressive results. Las Vegas recycles nearly all indoor water, treating and returning it to Lake Mead. Arizona has pioneered water banking, storing unused water underground for future use, and is exploring large-scale desalination projects along the Gulf of California. Meanwhile, Los Angeles is expanding wastewater recycling programs that aim to make the city nearly independent of imported water by mid-century. These urban innovations show that even sprawling desert cities can adapt when necessity demands it. Agriculture, which consumes the vast majority of the Colorado River's water, is also evolving. Farmers are adopting drip irrigation systems, soil moisture sensors, and drought-resistant crops to stretch every drop. Some are transitioning from thirsty crops like alfalfa to less water-intensive alternatives. In places like Yuma, Arizona, Partnerships between farmers and cities are emerging, where urban areas fund agricultural efficiency projects in exchange for saved water. Technology, policy, and community engagement are converging to form a new model of water stewardship. But adaptation is not only about technology, it's about mindset. The era of abundance is over, and resilience now means learning to live within nature's limits. Innovation is giving the Colorado River Basin a fighting chance, proving that human creativity, if paired with cooperation and respect for the environment, can still carve a sustainable path forward in a drying world. The decline of the Colorado River is not just a human crisis, it is an unfolding ecological disaster. Once a vibrant artery of life stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California, the river sustained a vast web of plants, animals, and wetlands across some of North America's most diverse ecosystems. Today, much of that natural richness is vanishing. As the river is dammed, diverted, and drained, habitats are drying up, species are disappearing, and an entire ecosystem that evolved over millennia is teetering on the edge of collapse. Perhaps the most striking symbol of this ecological unraveling is the Colorado River Delta. Once a lush, green paradise of lagoons and marshes teeming with birds and fish, the delta has been reduced to a barren wasteland. Since the completion of major dams like Hoover and Glen Canyon, the river rarely reaches the sea. What was once a thriving estuary supporting hundreds of species is now mostly dust and salt flats. Throughout the basin, similar stories are playing out. Declining water levels have devastated riparian habitats, the vital green corridors that line the river's edge. Endangered fish like the humpback chub and razorback sucker struggle to survive as warm, shallow waters replace their natural, fast-flowing environments. Migratory birds lose nesting grounds as wetlands vanish, while invasive species move in to fill the void. The ecological collapse of the Colorado River is a warning about the cost of overexploitation. For decades, the river was managed as a water supply system, not a living ecosystem. But without a healthy environment, even human systems will eventually fail. Restoring balance will require more than engineering. It demands a recognition that the river's survival and our own are inseparable, and that protecting nature is the only way to secure the future of the West. The Colorado River has always defined the American West, shaping its cities, economies, and dreams. But now, as the river faces unprecedented strain, the future of this vast region hangs in the balance. The choices made in the coming years will determine whether the West continues to thrive or enters a new era of decline. Climate change, overuse, and outdated policies have brought the system to its breaking point, but they have also forced a reckoning. How can tens of millions of people continue to live, farm, and build in one of the driest places on Earth? The path forward will not be easy, but it is still possible. It begins with cooperation among states, tribes, and nations to rewrite the rules of water sharing for a hotter, drier future. Innovation must become the new norm. Advanced recycling systems, drought-resistant agriculture, and smarter urban planning can help stretch every drop. At the same time, society must confront the uncomfortable truth that sustainability may require doing less, growing fewer water-intensive crops, building fewer lawns, and learning to live within natural limits. Equally important is restoring the river's ecosystems. A living Colorado River is essential not just for wildlife, but for the people who depend on its flow. Indigenous voices, long ignored, must be central to shaping a more equitable and holistic vision for water management, one that values cultural, environmental, and spiritual connections alongside economic needs. In the end, the story of the Colorado River is a story of resilience and reinvention. The American West has always been a land of bold ideas and enduring spirit. If that same courage can be applied to saving its most precious resource, then the river, and the millions who depend on it, may yet have a future worth fighting for.